Hello everybody, my name is Chris Plante. We're here at Polygon.com. I'm joined today by Steve Gaynor from the Fulbright Company.
Hey.
You made this little game called Gone Home, and it just took the world by storm. Today I want to talk about what it's been like after releasing that game.
Sure.
And really just from the moment, I guess you pressed publish, if that's not really how it works. But
what if
sure.
it was? What if there was just a big green button and you just went...
And that's all you ever had to do.
Yeah.
You just have to think about the game.
It's a beautiful fantasy.
Press the button. But let's start with kind of the reviews and all that stuff right after the game. I'm curious just what that's like, releasing it to the public, and I mean, such an overwhelming surge of positivity from, game sites, but all the way up to like the New York Times.
Yeah. I mean, it's always scary. I think it's scarier when, we're like a very small team, and this is a game that, the four of us on the team full time made. It's like when it's so much closer to you as a developer than when you are on like a really huge project. I think it is just that much scarier because you don't know how people are going to react. We thought. We liked the game. We were happy with it. We were like, okay, at the very least, we made something that we think is good, so that's cool. But you never know how many other people are going to agree with you, right? Because you can think you made an awesome game, and then there's like 20 people that are like, yeah, it is awesome. Everybody else they don't get it or whatever, So we felt really grateful for the fact that a lot of people connected with what we were doing.
Yeah.
And we did not predict you never know what numbers to predict, but we did not, we weren't like, yeah, we're going to see some 10 out of 10s, because the Polygon review was one of the first ones that we saw that went up, and we're like, you hope for something that people will make a deep connection with, care about a lot, but that will also review well, and those two things don't always go together, there can be something that has an incredibly rabid following that people love that sells tons of copies because it's an awesome game, but also it doesn't line up with all those criteria for gets high review scores, and so it's awesome to be able to see 9s and 10s, but at the end of the day, what really matters is that we started getting all these tweets and emails and stuff from people just talking about that the game meant something to them, and that was what really, I think, was overwhelming for us, just seeing the individual stories of how people reacted to the game, and that they wanted to share that with us.
Can you go into any of those? Because I mean, I can only imagine it's a very personal game, obviously. Yeah. Were there any certain stories that hit you and it's like, oh my gosh, this is why I do this?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, some of it was public, Zoe Quinn wrote a post on her blog about how closely the events of the game paralleled a lot of her teenage years. She and her first girlfriend were in a band together, and they dyed their hair together, and there was all this stuff where it was I saw all these things from, she saw all these things from her own life in a video game, a very direct one-to-one kind of way, and that's amazing to hear someone could see themselves in their game, in your game that you made so directly. But there were tons of other people who I think they were thinking of it in terms of the fact that their experience is very different from the characters in the game, and they would preface the email with, I'm a 37-year-old straight guy from Wisconsin, but I played this and it really reminded me of falling in love for the first time when I was a teenager, and brought back all these memories of what that was like. And there was Alec Mears' piece on Rock Paper Shotgun about how he identified with the dad's experience, and that was it's awesome seeing the reactions from people who are there are so many direct parallels in my own life to this game. That's amazing in one way, but then seeing how many different kinds of people from different parts of the world, walks of life, or whatever, were this part of the game really resonated with me, or I saw myself in this other aspect, was in aggregate was just kind of amazing, because I think that when you make a game, you make it for yourself. You kind of think of well, I would like this game, or okay, this story is about this kind of person, so maybe someone who has that kind of experience, they'll connect with it. But then seeing the breadth of how many different kinds of people, you don't even think of playing your game, much less connecting with it, saying that they found something for them, and it was crazy.
Yeah, I'm curious. I mean, it seems like the distinction that a lot of people have drawn between Gone Home and I guess AAA games, but a lot of games in general, is that it's about the storytelling, right? It's that that here's a game that is telling this really personal story, and also telling a story that is rarely, if ever, told in video games. But I don't know, as I've kind of like distanced myself from it, it seems like what's special about it, which is insane, is that it's basically an empathic experience. It's something that is like putting you in this person's shoes that you haven't been in, and I hadn't really thought about how few games ask me to do that. And maybe that's because so much of it, games are violent, so it's really hard. My instinct is to distance myself from that. But was that something that you kind of set out to do when you're making this? Do you say, I want to give someone that chance to, be in someone else's shoes?
To some degree. I think that when we decided, okay, we're not going to have combat, we're not going to have like puzzles, like puzzly puzzles, like you do have to find a couple of key codes in the game or whatever, but not like solve this sliding block puzzle or whatever. When we made those decisions, we realized, okay, well, that means that we can just talk about normal people, right? Because I think that the thing that you're pointing out is when you play as a character who's a person with a backstory and all of their individual traits and obsessions and whatever, but they're also in this like intense combat experience or this crazy abstract world where you have to like switch the gravity around or whatever. It's like some of it can be relatable, but also I have never been in a life or death situation, right? Like I've shot guns in like a range, like I guess anytime you are driving your car, you're theoretically in a life or death. But it's like, I've never been in a firefight. I've never been like, I have to figure out how not to die. Like that's a completely abstract concept that's apart from the life of most people who are going to play whatever you make, right? Sure. I mean, people in the armed forces know what it's like to be getting shot at, but like, that's the rarity as far as your audience goes. And I think that gives designers an opportunity to say, okay, you don't have to figure out who's trying to kill you or why there are all these crazy puzzles or whatever. The entire game can be about like, well, yeah, what can you learn about these people by what they've left behind, by what you discover, by the insights that you find about them. And the game, the play is about how you decide to explore the space and attribute meaning to things by saying this is important and that's important. I'm going to engage with this and make all of these connections, as opposed to how do I get to the next mission objective? And I think it allows you to talk about these characters in a more direct way. That doesn't have to be through this lens of this other experience that is like completely abstract to you or me.
Sure. I remember after your work on Bioshock 2 on Minerva's that you gave a talk at NYU Games practice thing, and it was basically about gear gating. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, it was like Metroid style, equipment gating. Yeah.
But it was interesting to see that, and then to have Gone Home, where it felt like while I was watching that, it was stripping everything away from your work on Minerva's and saying like, here's the core of it, and then seeing something like Gone Home, which was a reflection of that. Was it refreshing almost to have the opportunity to kind of strip away all the complexities?
Yeah, and the thing that was interesting and useful is like, as the level designer of Gone Home, because I laid out the house and placed the locked doors and all the other objects and stuff. I used those same techniques, because what we wanted to do was use the gating in the house in Gone Home as an organizational technique. It's like, because we tell the story structurally the same way you tell a story through audio diaries in a Bioshock level, which is, okay, you enter a space and it's a non-linear space, like you could go to this room or that room or, explore different areas first or second. But we also have to be able to predict that the player will roughly go through things in this general order, because you're going to be finding audio diaries along the way, and the audio diaries do tell a linear story of this happened, then this happened. And so, it was a process of saying, we are going to have gating in the game. We're going to say you can't go in the attic or the east wing or the basement first. You have to fully explore this first big chunk of the game before you can move on, because it's sort of, chapter one. And we want to give you the opportunity to have fully explored chapter 1 before you just accidentally bumble into chapter 3 and you're like, what the hell's, I have no context for what's happening. And like, it's this push and pull of within each chunk, it's a player driven experience. Like we aren't going to say you have to hear this first, then find this next. But in the broad strokes, we want to say, okay, you can't accidentally, get into the second to last chapter of the game. And so, we use those kinds of Bioshock-esque techniques of saying, you will explore this area and then find a tool, not a player tool, not like a verb, like like the ice beam or something, but you'll find the locker combination, so you can get the basement key, and now you can progress to chapter 2 of the story. Or a lot of it is knowledge gating, where it's like, okay, you found a map that showed you where the secret passages were, so now you know where they are. You can get into the secret passage to blah, blah, blah. And so it was not a method of like discarding those techniques, but of kind of like you were saying, simplifying them and converting them into the methods of like playing that stuff out mechanically that would be available if you were in a house, as opposed to in this crazy world we have like genetic powers and stuff. Sure. But I'm really glad that I had the background of like having built stories that way in the past and being able to apply that to a different frame with Gone Home.
Yeah, I want to talk about, I guess, your life, basically, after this. Because, so when you decided to make this game, you moved in, essentially, with your coworkers, or the other members of the studio.
Yeah.
You released the game. It sold 250,000, and counting.
Yep.
Do you still live with your coworkers?
No. Well, technically one of them, but like we're getting our own places, because like moving into a house together, I'm glad that Carla and Yanaman were up for it, because I mean, the thing was for us, we knew what kind of game we wanted to make, and we knew we had X amount of money, because we just used our savings for this game. We didn't do a Kickstarter or like get investors or anything, and so the amount of resources we started with was like our constraint. It was like, that's how big of a game we can make. That's how long we have to make it. And so moving into a house together in Portland, as opposed to like in the Bay Area, was a method of saying, okay, we can split rent. We can live in a cheap city and we can all live in the same house, and our office is in the basement, and like we can have more time to actually get the game finished on our own terms, right? Because I think that I have friends who have done really successful Kickstarters. They can be great, but A, it's a full-time job, somebody's full-time job to make a successful Kickstarter, and B, I think there are certain projects that are really good for something like Kickstarter, and some that it doesn't really make sense. And like Gone Home, we didn't have like a flashy sell trailer of like, pay for this before it exists. You walk around a house and look at stuff. But we can't tell you anything else because that'd spoil it. Can you please pay for it now? Or and so we had to do everything we could to be able to do it just with what we had. And so I think it was really good for the game, for the process. But now we don't all have to live in the same house, which is a luxury. But yeah, the next time it'll be a little bit more traditional of a situation of we'll get some office space to work together in and live in our own homes and whatnot. But I think I'm glad we did it the way that we did.
Sure. Speaking about, the Kickstarter thing, right? We just had Rami here, and he was talking about, developing the game publicly for Nuclear Throne.
Right.
And how that was so fruitful for them. Do you feel like that's even something that you can do with the sort of games that you like to make? Or are you almost kind of, not hamstrung by the sorts of games that you make, but again, how do you kickstart a game if it's about mystery? How do you develop it publicly if it's this sort of project?
I think it all depends on, so kickstarting something or selling something, some of it is track record, right? Like, how did Double Fine get $3 million? They were like, Tim Schafer will make another adventure game. We don't have a title or what happens in the game, but Tim Schafer will make an adventure game. And so I don't know, if we were gonna go down that road next time, if you are the studio that made X game that you liked, well, okay, there's an in, right? But I think that, going on from that to like streaming development, or like, I don't know. I do think that Double Fine is another good example of their the documentaries that Two Player Productions did during development of Broken Age, you know, they did a really good, interesting job of showing every step of the process and all the arguments and all of the, you know, steps that it took to get Broken Age made, without spoiling the story or, you know, showing too much about it, so that if you watch the documentaries, you're like, well, now I don't even want to play the game anymore. You know, and that's a delicate balance to find, because Broken Age is, you know, it's all about discovering the stories you play through, and you don't want any of that stuff to come out before people are actually playing it. I don't know, it sounds like a lot of work. Like, for me, like, I don't know, I guess, like, the other thing is we worked so, and maybe this is probably true of the Vlambeer guys as well, but like, we worked so, we didn't have like a regular schedule or anything, you know, like we didn't have our discussions in the same place, you know, like we would work in our office, but then go on walks to talk about story stuff and figure shit out and whatever else. So I'm sure that if we were really excited about like having more ongoing insight into development on the next game, we could figure out a way to do it. But also, I don't know, I personally just kind of like being able to concentrate on making the thing, and then, you know, showing people stuff about it after we made some stuff. You know, that's personal taste. I don't know.
Well, I mean, I think that's a good place to kind of wrap it up, because here you are on essentially the second album, right?
Sure.
I would imagine the scariest part is, I don't know, maybe not for you, but you always hear that with musicians, where it's like, okay, now I have to make the thing that's next. That isn't just the first album with maracas. You know, maracas, the typical thing they add to the second album.
The classic sophomore maracas.
Sure, yeah. But what is that like now, you know, going into that after releasing something like Gone Home?
I don't know. I'm personally not that, I don't know. I mean, I'm personally not that worried about it.
No, that's good. You're allowed to be confident. That's okay.
I mean, I think it's less being confident, more just not thinking about it. You know, it's just sort of like, I don't know, we'll make another game, I guess.
Until some asshole brings it up in another game, crippling fear sets in.
But no, I mean, the thing is, like, I'm really inspired by, for instance, the guys at Supergiant, you know, who they worked together on the Command and Conquer series, and then they made Bastion, which was like an isometric real-time game, like the games they had experience with, and they made it their own and made Bastion awesome, and now they're making Transistor, and it's like Bastion, but they're branching off of it and making it its own new experience without like going totally into unexplored territory, and like, I think that we, you know, I want to keep exploring from the point we started at with Gone Home, and say, how do we take that and build on it and make it its own interesting, exciting thing that you know is valuable in and of itself, but that also, you know, is built on top of the base that we've already established, and just find. I'm pretty confident that if we can find a game that we're interested in building and feel that we can build, that I hope players will find it interesting to play as well. And so, you know, finding that balance will be a challenge, but that's the next thing on our plate.
I think that's a great place to end. Thank you for joining me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Thanks. And thank you for joining us. We'll be here all week with more of these videos as GDC wraps up. Until then, I'll see you next time.